Welcome for mathematics lesson. We're going to discuss scale drawing, specifically distances and bearings. In a safari rally, drivers are to follow the route A, B, C, D, A. B is 250 kilometers from A on a bearing of 0.75 degrees from A. C is on a bearing of 110 from A and 240 kilometers from B. The bearing of C from D is 0.40 degrees and a distance of 300 kilometers. By scale drawing, show the positions of the point A, B, C, and D. Remember to subscribe and to share this link with friends. So what we're going to have is an interpretation of this question bit by bit. So we're going to start from because we are given first the position of B with respect to A, then we're going to start from A. So if I assume that A is at this point and I draw a good compass at A at this point, let's say this is my A, then we've been given the relative position of B, that B is 250 kilometers on a bearing of 0.75 from A. The first thing we do, because the examiner has not restricted us to any scale, we can choose a scale of 1 centimeter to represent 50 kilometers. Now, when 1 centimeter represents 50 kilometers, then 250 will be represented by 5 centimeters only. So we're going to measure a distance of 5 centimeters instead of 250 kilometers. Then the bearing is 75. 0.75 is to show us that the bearing is true. It's true bearing, which has to strictly be measured from the north and in the clockwise direction. Therefore, standing at north, I need to measure 75 towards the clockwise direction, and I make a mark here. Then I produce the line now using a straight ruler. I produce this line. This is my angle of 75 degrees. Now, with an angle of 75 degrees, it means I love now to measure the 5 centimeters, which represent 250 kilometers. So 5 centimeters. Yeah, that is the exact mark for 5 centimeters. Then I make an arc. So that is the point where point B is going to be. If that is point B, now I need to erect a compass at point B. And because I have 75 degrees, I need to measure a 75 on the lower side of this line so that the knots are parallel to one another, and for me to increase the degree of my accuracy. Therefore, I'm going to measure 75 in this direction, and this is where 75 is degrees. So I produce a line now through that dot. So this is my compass. This is point B. I continue interpreting the question. We are told further that C is on a bearing of 110 from A and 280 kilometers from B. So the position of C is given with reference to both A and B. For A, we are going to measure 110 degrees. So I'll stand here and measure 110 degrees. Degrees. This is where the mark is. So I can produce the 110 degrees line. for me to measure 110, it means I'm leaving a 70 exactly at that point. Then now the other thing is to measure a distance of 280 kilometers from B. 280 kilometers are going to be represented by 5.6 centimeters. So I'll measure 5.6 centimeters using my compass and ruler. 5.6. So this is where 5.6 is. Then now I transfer it from B to the line which is giving me the desired angle. I make an arc at the point where the 110 degrees is intersecting with the 280 kilometers represented by 5.6 centimeters. This is where our point C is going to be located. That means now for me to raise a compass at point C, because I left a 70 here, I need to measure a 70 on the upper side of this line. Therefore, I'll stand at this point and measure 70 degrees. So this is where 70 is going to be. 70 is going to be there. So now I connect the mark with point C to produce a very good compass. Yes. A, B, C. Finally, we're going to locate the position of D. We are told that the bearing of C from D is 040 degrees and a distance of 300 kilometers. So for the distance, which is 300 kilometers, it means I'll divide 300 with 50 to give me 6 centimeters. So the distance to be considered on the scale is 6 centimeters. The bearing of 040 is of C from D. Therefore, we don't know where D is, but while we are at D, we go through an angle of 40 degrees for us to locate where C is. So for 2 points, let me sketch now the relationship between C and D. While we are at D, we need to measure 40 degrees for us to meet point C. This is D. That means if the bearing of C from D is 40, then the bearing of D from C is going to be the whole of this angle now, 180 plus the 40 here. So we're going to have an angle of 220. So the bearing of D from C is going to be 220. Therefore, I'm going to measure an angle of 220, and I'll do that by including a 40 here. When I add 40 to this, when I add 40 at this point, when I add 40 at that point, then I produce a line. Now this means that I'm having 180, then I've added 40. So the bearing from C all the way to the line connecting us with D is having 220. When I will measure now my 6 centimeters to represent 300 kilometers, exactly 6 centimeters, and I stand here to make the arc. This means I should measure now my 40 at this point for me to raise a very good compass and to measure 40 degrees at this point. 40 degrees exactly, that is the mark. So now when I connect this one with the 40 degrees mark, I'm going to erect a very good compass. And this, I've measured a 40. This becomes our D. So what we are having now is the position of C from D, the 40 degrees now as a grid. So we had to determine from the given bearing of 40 degrees of C from D, so that we may know the bearing of D from C is 220. Therefore, now we can connect now all the points A to D, because the roots are supposed to be clear. A to D. Then from B to C should also be connected. So these are the relative positions of the 4 points. What follows now is a reading and solving some questions from the same diagram now. Determine the distance of A from C. The distance of A from C now, when I measure from this point, from A to C, this is the radius. Then I have to transfer it now to my ruler. So from the 0 mark, what I can see here is 8.7. Therefore, I need a distance of 8.7. I multiply by 50 for me to get the real distance. 8.7 by 50. This is 435 kilometers on the ground. 8.7 kilometers in the paper represents 435 on the ground. The bearing of B from C. So the bearing of B from C is going to be the whole of this ankle. Actually, B from C, the bearing of B from C, actually I need to read this small ankle here, then I subtract it from 180 degrees. So I need to consider this ankle, which is equivalent to just before 40. This is 38, exactly 38 degrees. So I need to take 360 minus 38. So the bearing is going to be the true bearing, 322 degrees, or as compass bearing, we have measured from north 38 degrees towards west. So as compass bearing, as true bearing. Finally, the distance and bearing of A from D. A from D. So while we are at A from D. So at D, the bearing of A from D. So the bearing is going to be, I measure this ankle first, and this ankle is exactly 39. Exactly 39. That means A from D, we are measuring from the north 39 degrees towards the west, or when we subtract that acute angle, we're going to get 321 degrees as the true bearing. The other thing is now the distance. So standing at A to D, yeah, then I transfer to the ruler. I'm going to have 8.6. Yeah, exactly 8.6. Therefore, if this is 8.6 in the paper, then on the ground, 8.6 shall represent 430 kilometers on the ground.